Don't touch anything. Just clean what you're told and stay invisible." The words echoed across the executive floor, sharp enough to stop motion, sharp enough to draw quiet laughter from tailored suits. Security shifted closer. The silent CEO didn't even look his way, and the room decided the janitor had overstepped. He didn't apologize. He simply lifted his eyes, calm, unreadable, as if he understood something no one else did. What none of them knew was that this moment would fracture everything they believed about power. This isn't a story about cleaning floors. It's about what happens when the wrong man is underestimated. Before I show you the exact moment a foreign executive finally broke his silence, and why the CEO's confidence collapsed, pay attention. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The air conditioning hummed like a held breath. Polished glass reflected wealth and certainty, and the man in gray coveralls stood alone inside it. Mop paused, knuckles tight but steady. He'd learned long ago that silence could be armor. The executives returned to their murmured strategies, already erasing him from memory, convinced the interruption was over. It wasn't. He resumed his work with deliberate care, the quiet scrape of rubber against marble grounding him. Calm didn't come from weakness. It came from practice, from knowing when to wait, from knowing when the floor beneath arrogance would eventually crack. Earlier that evening, Riku Moreno had kissed his daughter's forehead as she slept, her schoolbooks fanned across the kitchen table, Japanese characters penciled carefully beside English ones. He'd promised her he'd be home before sunrise. He always did. Promises were the only luxury he allowed himself anymore. On the executive floor, the contrast was brutal. Italian leather chairs, abstract art worth more than his monthly rent. Voices that assumed the world bent naturally in their direction. He moved through it unseen, a necessary inconvenience, the kind of labor that kept power polished but never acknowledged. The CEO, a woman known for freezing rooms with a glance, stood near the windows now, her posture flawless, her authority unquestioned. She didn't bother learning the names of people like him. People like him didn't last long in her world. That was the rule. A quiet tension threaded the space as preparations continued for the late-night arrival everyone pretended not to be nervous about. Foreign investors. A critical merger. The kind of deal that decided futures. He caught fragments as he worked, not because he was curious, but because listening had once been his job. Someone complained about cultural rigidity. Someone else dismissed it as posturing. Money would smooth everything. It always did. Except sometimes it didn't. His phone vibrated softly in his pocket. A message from the babysitter. Mila had woken briefly from a bad dream, asked when he'd be home. He typed back with gloved fingers, telling her soon, telling her he loved her, telling her to remember the new word they'd practiced together. She sent back a heart and a clumsy handwritten character. That was why he stayed invisible. Not because he had to, but because visibility came with costs he couldn't afford for her. A junior executive passed too close, clipped the mop bucket, muttered something about watching where you roll that thing. He nodded once, absorbing the insult without reaction. Dignity wasn't loud, it endured. The elevator chimed, conversations sharpened, spines straightened. The foreign delegation had arrived. He stepped aside as rehearsed greetings filled the air, eyes flicking toward the silent man at the center of the group. Older, still. Observant. The one no one seemed able to read, the one they should have been paying attention to. As introductions stumbled forward, he noticed what others didn't. The hesitation before handshakes, the subtle tightening of jaws, the misaligned rhythm of respect, small fractures forming beneath expensive confidence. The CEO gestured sharply when she saw him pause near the corridor. "You're done here," she said without lowering her voice. "This area's restricted." It wasn't the words. It was the assumption baked into them that he had nothing worth hearing, that his presence was an error. He met her gaze for a brief second, not defiant, not apologetic, just steady. Something unreadable passed through his expression, then was gone. He turned his cart smoothly and moved toward the service hallway, the world of power sealing behind him like a glass door. They thought the moment had ended. They thought the hierarchy had been enforced. They didn't see the way the silent executive's eyes followed him. They didn't hear the quiet shift in the room's energy. And they didn't yet understand that the floor they stood on was about to give way. The service hallway swallowed him in softer light and familiar echoes, the polished confidence of the executive floor fading behind a thick fire door. He pushed the cart forward, wheels rattling once before settling, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The dismissal still rang in his ears, not because it hurt, but because it reminded him how easily people confused silence with insignificance. Behind the glass, voices rose and fell, sharper now. Something hadn't landed right. He felt it the way a sailor feels a change in current before the storm shows itself. He'd lived long enough in boardrooms like that to recognize the signs. Forced smiles, over-explained confidence, the kind of tension money couldn't smooth over. He parked the cart near a maintenance alcove and wiped his hands on a rag already stained from years of honest work. The building hummed differently here. Pipes whispered. Vents breathed. This was where the tower told the truth about itself. Out there, everything was performance. A pair of junior analysts hurried past, badges swinging, voices low but frantic. "Doesn't respond," one said. "Just stares. I don't even know if he understands." The other cut him off with a nervous laugh that fooled no one. They disappeared around the corner without noticing him. He leaned back against the cool concrete wall, eyes closing for half a second. Images surfaced uninvited. Long tables, interpreters sweating through suits, deals balanced on phrasing, on honorifics, on knowing when not to speak at all. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, across an ocean, long before mop handles replaced briefing folders. His phone vibrated again. Another message. This time, a picture. Mila, at the kitchen table, hair a mess, holding up a paper covered in characters she was still learning. Under it, she'd written, "You said this one means patience." He smiled despite himself. Patience, of all the words. He typed back slowly, choosing each letter with care. "It does. And you're doing great. I'll explain more tomorrow." He added a heart, then another. He needed her asleep, safe, dreaming of things far removed from power games and glass towers. A sharp voice cut through the hallway. "Why is this corridor not cleared?" The CEO. Her heels clicked with purpose, authority trailing her like a shadow. She stopped short when she saw him, annoyance flashing across her face. "I told you this area was restricted." "It is," he said evenly, nodding toward the sign behind him. "This is the service access." Her jaw tightened. "Then stay where you belong." She turned away before he could respond, already barking instructions into her headset. The assumption hung heavy in the air, heavier than the insult itself. He watched her go, the back of her perfectly tailored jacket rigid with certainty. He could have corrected her, could have said more. Instead, he picked up the mop again. There was a spill near the elevator bank, something sticky and dark against marble. He worked methodically, each movement precise, controlled. Control mattered. It always had. Through the glass, the silent executive finally spoke. Just one sentence. He didn't hear the words, but he saw the effect. Faces stiffened. A murmur rippled. Someone laughed too loudly. The CEO's shoulders squared as if bracing against an unseen weight. A facilities supervisor approached him, lowering his voice. "They want everything perfect out there," he said, gesturing vaguely. "No mistakes tonight, big money." He nodded. Understood. As the supervisor left, he glanced once more toward the boardroom. The silent man's gaze drifted, briefly, unmistakably, toward the service corridor. Toward him. There was no confusion in those eyes, only recognition, sharp and assessing. His pulse ticked faster, but his expression didn't change. Recognition was dangerous. It cracked doors he'd worked hard to keep shut. He finished the spill and stood, stretching his shoulders. The building felt like it was holding its breath now, waiting for something inevitable. He didn't know yet if he'd step into it or keep walking past, but he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever happened next would reach beyond this floor. If you're still with me, make sure you're subscribed, because what unfolds next exposes power in ways most people never see. He pushed the cart forward again, the quiet rhythm of work steadying him as the voices behind glass edged closer to braking. The cart rolled forward, its wheels echoing softly as he guided it toward the service elevator. Behind him, the murmur of voices sharpened, confidence thinning into something brittle. He didn't turn back. Not yet. The elevator doors slid open with a tired groan, and he stepped inside, the doors sealing him away from glass, wealth, and watching eyes. The descent felt longer than usual. Each floor ticked by, carrying the weight of a building that believed it was untouchable. By the time the doors opened onto the underground level, the tension above felt distant, muted by concrete and fluorescent light. He clocked out without ceremony, nodding to a guard who barely looked up, then stepped into the cool night air. The city smelled like rain and exhaust. His shoulders loosened as he walked, the rhythm of his steps syncing with familiar streets. This was the part of his life that belonged only to him and his daughter. No boardrooms, no titles, just promises kept. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a paper lantern. He slipped off his shoes quietly, moving by instinct, and found her curled on the couch, a blanket tangled around her legs. The babysitter whispered a quick update, relief clear on her face, then slipped out with a tired smile. He knelt in front of Mila, brushing hair from her eyes. She stirred, blinking up at him. "You're late," she murmured, not accusing, just observant. "Just a little," he said softly. "I'm here." She sat up, clutching the paper she'd shown him earlier. "I practiced," she said, holding it out proudly. "I didn't forget." "I know." He smiled, genuine now, the weight of the tower falling away. "You never do." They moved to the small kitchen table, steam rising from reheated soup. The apartment hummed with old pipes and distant traffic, a soundtrack far removed from the controlled silence of executive floors. She talked while she ate, about school, about a classmate who'd laughed at her accent when she tried a new word, about how it made her feel small. "What did you do?" he asked. "I didn't yell," she said, thinking. "I just kept saying it right." He nodded. "That takes strength." She studied him for a moment, eyes too perceptive for 9 years old. "Did someone make you feel small tonight?" The question landed harder than any insult. He considered deflecting, then chose honesty. "They tried," he said, "but they don't get to decide who I am." She seemed satisfied with that, turning back to her soup. "Good, because you know a lot," she added casually. "More than them." He laughed under his breath. If only she knew how true that was. On the counter sat a small wooden box, worn smooth at the edges. He opened it carefully, checking its contents out of habit. Inside lay old business cards, a faded metro pass from Tokyo, and a slim notebook filled with meticulous notes written in 2 languages. He closed it again, sliding it back into its place. Some doors stayed closed for a reason. After she brushed her teeth, he tucked her into bed, answering questions about patience, about why some people listened and others didn't. Listening is a skill, he told her. Most people think talking is enough. Will you teach me? She asked, already half asleep. Every day, he promised. When the apartment finally fell quiet, he sat alone at the table, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. His phone buzzed once more. A notification from work. Emergency meeting extended. All hands on standby. He stared at the screen, the glow reflecting in tired eyes. He could ignore it. Let the night pass. Let the tower handle its own mess. That had been the plan. Keep his head down. Keep his world small enough to protect. But upstairs, miles of glass and steel were cracking under pressure they didn't understand. And somewhere inside that building, a silent man was weighing respect against offense, honor against profit. He stood, slipping his jacket back on, glancing once toward Mila's door. The wooden box seemed heavier now, its presence a reminder of who he'd been and what he still carried. Patience, he murmured to himself, repeating the word she'd learned. Then he stepped back into the night, the city opening before him, and headed toward a choice that would not stay quiet much longer. The ride back toward the tower felt faster, like the city itself sensed the shift and urged him along. Streetlights streaked across the windshield as rain began to fall, light at first, then steady, tapping a rhythm against the glass. He parked in the underground garage, swiped his badge, and stepped once more into the building that pretended it never needed people like him. The elevator ride up was crowded now. Suits, heels, tense faces reflected back in the mirrored walls. No one spoke. Phones buzzed with half-answered messages, eyes flicking upward as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened onto the executive floor, sound rushed in. Voices layered with strain, the clean hum of confidence fractured by urgency. He stepped out, cartless this time, hands empty, posture unchanged. No one noticed. They were too busy orbiting the gravity of impending failure. At the center of it all stood the CEO, her expression sharpened into something brittle. She spoke in clipped directives, pacing in tight lines, authority cracking at the edges. "We're not renegotiating," she said. "They need us more than we need them." A senior advisor leaned in, whispering something urgent. Her jaw tightened. "He doesn't respond to pressure," the advisor murmured. "He just watches." Across the room, the Japanese delegation sat composed, untouched cups of tea cooling on the table. The silent executive's hands rested neatly before him, eyes steady, giving nothing away. The interpreter hovered uselessly, translating words that landed flat, stripped of the respect they required. He paused near the edge of the room, close enough to hear, far enough to remain unseen. It was familiar territory, the space between influence and invisibility. He listened as phrasing missed its mark, as tone overreached, as impatience dressed itself up as confidence. Every mistake stacked quietly, dangerously. A junior associate stumbled through an apology, words tumbling too fast. The silent executive inclined his head once, not in agreement, not in dismissal, just acknowledgement. The room misread it as progress. The CEO exhaled sharply. "We're burning time," she said. "Adjust the numbers." That'll get his attention. It wouldn't. Money was already on the table. What was missing couldn't be bought. A facilities manager hurried past him, whispering into a headset about press waiting downstairs, about shareholders demanding updates. The building's polished calm was unraveling thread by thread. He felt it in the air, the way tension hummed just beneath sound. The silent executive's gaze shifted, slow and deliberate, scanning the room. It landed on him again, held. There was no confusion there, only curiosity sharpened by recognition. He felt the pull of that look like a question asked without words. The CEO noticed the pause, followed the line of sight. Her eyes narrowed when she saw him standing there, hands folded loosely in front of him. "Why are you still here?" she snapped. "This isn't your concern." A few heads turned. "Not many. Enough." "I was called back," he said evenly, gesturing to his phone. "Emergency coverage." She scoffed. "We don't need janitorial coverage right now. We need solutions." The irony almost made him smile. Almost. He took a step back, yielding space, diffusing the moment before it could harden. She turned away, dismissing him again, already refocusing on the deal slipping through her fingers. The interpreter cleared his throat, trying again, voice uncertain. The silent executive finally spoke, longer this time. The interpreter hesitated, then translated carefully. He says, "Trust is built before numbers, not after." The room stilled. The words lingered, heavier than any figure on the screen. The CEO forced a tight smile. "Of course," she said, "and trust comes from transparency." The silent executive's gaze didn't leave her. He said something else, softer. The interpreter swallowed. "He asks who advised you on cultural protocol." No one answered. Eyes darted. Silence stretched. He felt the question like a weight pressing forward, searching for someone willing to carry it. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but with inevitability. This was the fracture point, the moment before collapse or correction. He shifted his weight just slightly, enough to be seen, enough to signal readiness without forcing the issue. The CEO noticed. Her eyes flashed with irritation. "I said, this isn't your—" The silent executive raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. He turned fully now, addressing the room, then spoke directly, clearly, in Japanese. No interpreter moved. The words hung untranslated, charged, demanding understanding rather than convenience. Every instinct he had sharpened over years of negotiation stirred awake. He understood every syllable, every nuance, every unspoken expectation wrapped inside them. The room waited, and for the first time, power hesitated. Silence settled heavy after the untranslated words, thick enough that even the air conditioning seemed to hesitate. Faces turned instinctively toward the interpreter, then back to the silent executive, confusion spreading like a slow leak. The CEO's irritation sharpened into something closer to alarm. "Well?" she demanded, her tone cutting. "What did he say?" The interpreter's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at the silent executive again, waiting for permission that didn't come. He asked a question," the interpreter finally said, uncertain. "About intention." "That's not helpful," the CEO snapped. "Ask him to clarify." The silent executive didn't move. His gaze drifted instead, deliberate, until it landed on the man near the edge of the room, the janitor, the one everyone had dismissed twice already. Recognition flickered there again, unmistakable now. A few others noticed it too. A murmur rippled, subtle but real. Why was he looking at him? He felt the room tilt, pressure building behind his ribs. This was the point where patience ended and consequence began. He hadn't planned on stepping forward tonight. He'd planned on keeping promises, on staying invisible. But invisibility had a way of collapsing when truth demanded space. The CEO followed the silent executive's gaze, confusion knitting her brow. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Before anyone could redirect the moment, he spoke. Quietly, calmly, in Japanese. The sound of it cut through the room like a blade through silk. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step into the center. He simply answered the question that had been asked, translating not just words but meaning. Tone measured with precision, respect woven carefully into each phrase. The effect was immediate. The silent executive straightened, eyes sharpening with focus. He replied just as calmly, the exchange flowing back and forth without pause, without the clumsy delay of interpretation. It wasn't flashy, it was exact, nuanced, the kind of language spoken by people who understood what was at stake beneath the surface. The interpreter froze, hands slack at his sides. A senior advisor whispered, "What the hell is happening?" The CEO's face drained of color. "Stop," she said sharply. "Who authorized this?" He finished the sentence he was in the middle of before turning to her. His voice, when he spoke in English, was still even. "He asked whether your company understands the difference between compliance and respect," he said. I answered. "You're out of line," she snapped. "You're here to clean floors." He didn't flinch. "I am," he said, "and right now the floor is unstable." A few people inhaled sharply. No one laughed this time. The silent executive said something again, softer now. He listened, nodded once. "He says the deal isn't dead," he translated, "but it won't move forward until he knows who in this room understands responsibility beyond profit." The words landed hard. This wasn't a negotiation tactic, it was a test. The CEO looked around, searching for footing. "We have an entire legal team. He isn't asking about law," he said gently. "He's asking about honor." The room had shifted. Executives who'd barely noticed him before were staring now, reassessing, recalculating. Power didn't like surprises, especially when they spoke fluently. If you're finding this moment as tense as it feels, make sure you're subscribed. Because what's about to unfold reshapes everything they thought they controlled. The CEO took a step toward him, voice low, dangerous. "Who are you?" He met her eyes without challenge, without submission. Someone who's listened long enough to hear where this went wrong. The silent executive rose slowly from his chair. The movement commanded attention without effort. He bowed his head slightly, not to the CEO, but to the man everyone else had overlooked. That single gesture did what money, titles, and threats could not. It rewrote the room. No one spoke. No one dared interrupt. The boardroom had become a witness chamber, and the hierarchy it worshipped was cracking under the weight of a truth it could no longer ignore. He felt it then, not triumph, not revenge, but responsibility. Once you stepped into the light, you didn't get to control how far it spread. The silent executive spoke again, longer this time. He listened, every word precise, every implication clear. When he finished translating, his voice carried across the room. "He says the conversation can continue," he said, "but only if it's led by someone who understands what was nearly broken." Every eye turned toward him, and for the first time, the CEO had no immediate response. The silence stretched, brittle and loud in its own way. Every pair of eyes still fixed on him as if the room had quietly decided he belonged at its center. He felt the weight of it press against his chest. Not fear exactly, but the familiar pressure of a consequence. Once attention locked on, it didn't let go easily. The CEO recovered first. Authority snapped back into her posture, sharp and defensive. "This is inappropriate," she said. Security. The silent executive lifted a single finger. Not abrupt, not aggressive. Just enough. She stopped. That interruption landed harder than any raised voice. A few executives shifted in their seats, discomfort rippling outward. Power was recalibrating in real time, and no one liked feeling the ground move beneath them. "He's asking you something," the interpreter said quietly now, unsure where his role even fit anymore. He nodded once, listening again as Japanese filled the air. The cadence was deliberate, layered with meaning that demanded more than literal translation. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. "He wants to know," he said, choosing his words with care, "whether this company sees partnership as a transaction or a responsibility." The CEO scoffed too quickly. "That's semantics." "No," he said, not unkindly, "it isn't." A murmur swept the room. Someone near the back whispered his job title again, disbelief edging the word. Janitor. As if repeating it might restore order. The silent executive spoke again. This time his tone edged with disappointment. He listened, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "He says he's watched this room." He translated. "Listened to how you speak about leverage, about pressure, about winning. He says those are the words of conquest, not collaboration." The accusation hung there, impossible to ignore. The CEO crossed her arms. "We're not here to be lectured." "He knows," he replied. "He's deciding whether he's here to walk away." That landed. Color drained from a few faces. This deal wasn't theoretical. It was structural. Jobs, stock, futures. The room understood numbers better than morality, and the numbers were starting to scream. The CEO turned to him fully now. "You," she said, voice low. "You've said enough. You're not authorized to speak for this company." He met her gaze, steady. "I'm not speaking for it," he said. "I'm speaking to him." The distinction mattered. The silent executive nodded slightly, confirming it. Rain streaked down the windows behind them, blurring the city lights into wavering lines. Thunder rolled faintly, distant but present, as if the night itself was leaning in. "He wants to know your role," the interpreter said softly, almost apologetic. He hesitated, just a fraction. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because answers had a way of changing everything once spoken aloud. Before he could respond, the CEO cut in. "He cleans floors," she said sharply. "That's his role." The silent executive looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, calmly but firmly. He didn't look away when he finished. "He says," the interpreter translated, voice tight, "that floors reveal everything people drop when they think no one is watching." A few people swallowed hard. The room felt smaller now. The hierarchy that once felt solid was compressing, reshaping itself around a truth it hadn't planned for. He could feel it pulling him forward, asking for more than translation, more than correction. He answered again in Japanese, respectful but unyielding, explaining without embellishment where the missteps had been, the rushed assumptions, the missed rituals, the subtle insults born from impatience, not malice, but damaging all the same. When he finished, the silent executive stood. Chairs shifted as people instinctively rose, then froze, unsure if they should sit or follow. "He says the deal is paused," he translated, "not canceled, paused, until he decides whether trust can be rebuilt." The CEO's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this," she said. "We have contracts." "He knows," he replied. "He also knows when to walk away from them." The silent executive turned his attention back to him, studying his face with open curiosity now. He asked one final question, quieter than the rest. He listened, then felt a familiar ache stir beneath his ribs. "He wants to know," he said, "why I care enough to intervene." The room waited. He didn't answer immediately. He thought of a small kitchen table, a paper lantern nightlight, a child practicing patience because the world didn't always listen. "Because," he said finally, voice steady, "some mistakes cost more than money." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was deciding. The silence that followed his answer felt heavier than before, as if the room itself was weighing the cost of what had just been said. No one rushed to fill it. Even the CEO seemed uncertain now. Her authority stalled mid-command, caught between outrage and the dawning realization that something irreversible had already occurred. The silent executive broke the pause. He spoke briefly, his tone neither warm nor cold, but resolved. The interpreter hesitated out of habit, then looked to him. He nodded once and translated. "He says the pause will last as long as it needs to," he said. "Rushed trust is no trust at all." A senior board member cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that fell flat. "We can arrange a follow-up meeting, a cultural consultant, whatever's required." The silent executive's eyes didn't leave him. He spoke again, longer this time. "He says consultants explain rules," he translated. "But understanding comes from lived experience." That distinction cut cleanly through the room. A few executives shifted uncomfortably, their polished certainty giving way to self-conscious reassessment. They'd spent years mastering optics, not substance. The CEO finally moved, stepping closer, lowering her voice as if proximity could reassert control. "You've made your point," she said to him. "Now step back. Let the professionals handle this." He looked at her for a long moment, not defiant, not submissive, just honest. "This is what handling it looks like," he replied. Her eyes flashed. "You're overestimating your importance." "Maybe," he said, "but not the consequences." The silent executive watched the exchange closely, interest sharpening into something like respect. He spoke again, addressing the CEO directly now. The interpreter translated carefully, each word deliberate. "He asks whether you believe authority comes from position or from accountability." The question landed like a verdict waiting to be read. The CEO opened her mouth, then stopped. For the first time since the night began, she seemed unsure which answer would cost less. Around her, people waited, suddenly aware they were witnessing something that would ripple far beyond this room. She straightened. "Authority comes from results," she said, "from responsibility." The silent executive nodded once, then turned back to him, asking something quieter. He listened, his expression unchanged, though something tightened behind his eyes. "He wants to know," he translated, "if you'd still speak this way if there were no witnesses." The room stilled again. This wasn't about performance now, it was about motive. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "especially then." That answer shifted something subtle but profound. The silent executive inclined his head slightly, acknowledgement passing between them without spectacle. He spoke again, a final statement delivered with calm certainty. "He says the deal will remain paused," he translated, "but tomorrow he'll return, not for numbers, for conversation." A breath released across the room, collective and unsteady. Paused meant hope. It also meant scrutiny. Nothing would resume the way it had been. The CEO turned away abruptly, jaw tight, already retreating into calculation. "This meeting is adjourned," she said. "Everyone out." Chairs scraped softly as people rose, conversations muted, eyes lingering on him with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. The interpreter approached, voice low. "I didn't know," he said, "about you." He nodded once. "Most people don't." As the room emptied, the silent executive remained. Just the two of them now, standing in a space stripped of audience and hierarchy. He spoke quietly. No interpreter needed. The words were simple: gratitude, respect, acknowledgement of shared understanding. He replied just as simply, returning the courtesy without embellishment. This wasn't the moment for explanations. Some things were better left intact, at least for now. When the silent executive finally left, escorted by aides, the room felt cavernous. The lights seemed harsher without bodies to soften them. He stood alone for a moment, absorbing the aftermath. The CEO reappeared near the door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You've complicated things," she said. "Things were already complicated," he replied. She studied him, searching for leverage that no longer existed. "This doesn't change your job." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." That seemed to unsettle her more than defiance would have. She turned sharply and left, heels echoing down the corridor. He exhaled slowly, the tension draining from his shoulders at last. The crisis hadn't ended. It had only shifted shape. But the imbalance had been exposed, publicly and unmistakably. As he stepped back into the service hallway, the familiar hum of pipes and vents greeted him like an old friend. Power rarely came looking here. Tonight it had followed anyway, and it wouldn't forget what it found. Somewhere above, decisions were already being reconsidered. Somewhere beyond this building, a child slept, unaware that patience had just rewritten a future. He reached for his phone, not to check messages but to ground himself in what mattered. Whatever came next, it would move forward from here, not backward. The floor behind him no longer felt unstable, it felt awake. The service hallway felt narrower as he walked it, as if the building itself were recalibrating around what had just happened. Every step echoed louder than before, not because the space had changed, but because he had. He reached the janitorial closet, set his hands against the metal door, and paused, breathing through the residual tension that still clung to his muscles. He wasn't supposed to be here anymore tonight. Not like this. The crisis had paused, yes, but its weight followed him, pressing forward with questions that didn't yet have answers. Tomorrow loomed large now, no longer abstract. Tomorrow meant consequences. He checked his phone. A message waited, sent minutes ago. Unknown number. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Boardroom A. Please attend. EC, no title, no explanation, just an expectation. He stared at the screen, then slid the phone back into his pocket. Attending meant visibility. Visibility meant risk. But retreating now would undo everything that had shifted. He thought again of the silent executive's question. Would you still speak this way if there were no witnesses? Yes, especially then. He finished his shift in a haze, hands moving on instinct as his mind worked ahead, mapping possibilities, preparing contingencies he'd hoped to leave behind forever. By the time he stepped outside, the rain had eased into a fine mist, city lights reflecting off wet pavement like fractured stars. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. His thoughts kept returning to Mila, to the fragile normalcy he'd built for her piece by piece. He pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a moment, engine idling, reminding himself that whatever happened tomorrow had to serve that purpose first. Inside, the apartment was still. He checked on her, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, the paper lantern nightlight casting soft shadows across the room. On her desk lay the same language notebook, open to a new page. She'd written a single character, larger and darker than the rest. Courage. He closed the door gently and returned to the kitchen, opening the wooden box at last. He hadn't touched its contents in years, not really. He spread them out on the table, the Metro pass, the business cards, the notebook filled with notes from a life he'd walked away from deliberately. He didn't feel regret, only responsibility. Tomorrow's conversation wouldn't be about proving who he used to be. It would be about choosing who he was willing to be now. The victory wouldn't come from exposure alone. It would come from preparation, from ensuring that when the spotlight returned, it revealed truth instead of spectacle. He reviewed everything he remembered from the meeting. The phrasing that had triggered offense, the moments where trust had frayed, the places where repair was possible. He sketched notes quietly, mapping how tomorrow could unfold if handled with care instead of control. If you're still following this, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next isn't loud, it's precise, and precision changes everything. Sleep came slowly. When it did, it carried fragments of old boardrooms and new kitchens, of languages overlapping, of patience tested and held. Morning arrived gray and cool. He dressed simply, the same clothes he always wore to work. No attempt to signal importance. The power of the day ahead didn't require costume. It required clarity. At the tower, security hesitated when they saw him arrive so early. One guard checked his badge twice, then waved him through with a confused nod. The lobby felt different in daylight, less imposing, more exposed. Glass reflected faces instead of shadows. Boardroom A was already unlocked. Inside, the long table gleamed under recessed lights. No executives yet, no CEO, just silence and possibility. He took a seat, not at the head, not at the edge, but where conversation could happen without dominance. He placed the notebook on the table, not as a prop, but as a reminder to himself. Footsteps approached. The door opened. The CEO entered alone. She stopped when she saw where he was sitting. "You're early," she said. "So are you," he replied. She closed the door behind her, arms crossing slowly, posture guarded. "I didn't sleep," she admitted after a moment. "Neither did I." They regarded each other across the table, not as adversaries now, but as people standing at the edge of a decision that would define more than a deal. Outside the boardroom, the building woke up, unaware that its balance of power was already shifting again. This time, quietly, deliberately, and without an audience. And that, he knew, was where the real work began. The CEO didn't sit right away. She circled the table once, heels tapping softly against the floor, eyes never leaving him. The silence between them felt different from the night before, less charged, more deliberate, as if both understood this wasn't about dominance anymore, but direction. "They'll be here soon," she said finally. "The delegation, legal, advisors." He nodded. "Then we should be clear before they arrive." She paused at the head of the table, but didn't take the seat. Instead, she rested her hands on the polished surface, leaning forward slightly. "You put me in an impossible position last night." "I exposed one," he replied calmly. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. That alone marked a shift. "You realize what people are saying," she continued. "They're asking questions I can't control." "Control isn't what they're looking for anymore," he said. "They're looking for accountability." She exhaled through her nose, a sharp, measured breath. "You speak like this is simple." "It isn't," he said, "but it is precise." Footsteps echoed outside the door, muted voices approaching. The moment narrowed. She straightened, smoothing her jacket out of habit, and then stopped herself. "Why are you really here?" she asked. "Not last night, today." He considered her honestly. "Because if this collapses the wrong way, People who never set foot in this room will pay for it. That landed. Not dramatically. He didn't intend it to. He thought of custodial staff, junior analysts, families built on paychecks tied to decisions made by people who rarely imagine the downstream effects. Mila's face flickered through his mind, unbidden. The door opened before she could respond. Advisors filed in first, then legal. Conversations hushed when they saw him already seated. Confusion rippled across faces, whispers barely contained. The CEO took her place at the head of the table at last, posture composed, authority reclaimed, but not absolute. The silent executive entered last. The room rose instinctively. He didn't rush them to sit. He observed first, eyes scanning faces, then briefly meeting his. There was acknowledgement there, quiet but unmistakable. They sat. The CEO began, her tone measured, rehearsed. She spoke of mutual opportunity, of long-term vision, of lessons learned. It was smoother than the night before, but still cautious, like someone stepping onto unfamiliar ground. The silent executive listened without interruption. When she finished, he spoke. Not long, not short. Just enough. He listened carefully, then translated. He says, appreciation is noted, he said. But words spoken under pressure reveal more than those prepared after. A few advisors stiffened. The silent executive continued. He leaned forward slightly, hands folded. The room followed the movement as if pulled by gravity. He spoke again, eyes now on him. He's asking, he translated, what has changed since last night. All eyes turned toward the CEO. She hesitated, only a fraction. Then she surprised the room. I have, she said, because I realized I was protecting my position instead of the partnership. The admission sent a low ripple through the table, some discomfort, some respect. The silent executive studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. He spoke again. He asks what you intend to do differently, he translated. The CEO glanced at him, brief and searching. He met her gaze, offering nothing but presence. The answer had to be hers. She straightened. I intend to listen before deciding, she said, and to ensure those advising me understand more than numbers. The silent executive's attention shifted back to him. He spoke quietly, the tone curious now, probing. He's asking, he translated, whether you'll be part of that process. The room stilled. This was the fulcrum. The moment where exposure either became spectacle or responsibility. He felt the weight of it press down, familiar and heavy. He didn't rush. I don't need a title, he said finally. I need authority to correct what I hear breaking. A murmur ran through the advisors. The CEO didn't interrupt. That alone was telling. The silent executive nodded, satisfied. He spoke once more, longer this time, his cadence confident. When he finished, the interpreter looked to him, then stepped back. He says, he translated, that trust begins today, and that it will be tested. Relief didn't flood the room. Something steadier did, resolve, the kind that came with work, not celebration. The CEO inclined her head. Then we begin today. As papers shifted and conversations resumed, quieter now, more careful, he leaned back slightly, exhaling. The victory wasn't complete, it wasn't even secure, but it had moved from exposure into structure. That mattered. He glanced at his phone beneath the table. A message from Mila waited, time-stamped minutes earlier. Good luck today. Remember patience. He smiled, just faintly, and slipped the phone away as the room leaned forward into its future, unaware that the smallest voice outside it had already helped shape the outcome. The meeting didn't end with handshakes or smiles. It ended with work. Real work. the kind that stripped away ceremony and exposed fault lines no one had wanted to acknowledge before. As advisors leaned in, recalculating strategy, the silent executive listened more than he spoke, his attention moving between faces, not documents. He stayed seated, observing, intervening only when language drifted back toward abstraction. Each time, the correction was subtle. A word adjusted, a phrase softened, a pause inserted where certainty had once bulldozed forward. The room followed his lead without quite realizing it, recalibrating its tone around something steadier than authority. The CEO watched it happen with a tight focus that bordered on discomfort. This was unfamiliar terrain. Leadership without command. Influence without intimidation. She contributed when needed, but more often she listened, absorbing not just content but cadence. At one point, legal pushed back, raising concerns about precedent. He responded calmly, translating the silent executive's reply with care. "He says precedent matters less than repair," he said. "Broken trust sets worse ones." No one argued that. Hours passed. Coffee cups multiplied. The city brightened outside the windows, unaware of the quiet restructuring happening several floors above. By late morning, the outline of a revised agreement began to take shape. Not finalized, but viable. Respect had been written into the margins, not as a slogan, but as a condition. When the silent executive finally stood, the room followed instinctively. He spoke briefly, nodding once toward the CEO, then toward him. "He says this is a beginning," he translated. Not a concession. The delegation gathered their materials with measured efficiency. There was no triumph in their movements, only purpose. As they filed out, the silent executive paused beside him. "You should not be cleaning floors," he said quietly, in English this time. He met the man's gaze. "Someone has to," he replied. The silent executive smiled faintly, then left without another word. The room exhaled all at once. Advisors began packing up, murmuring about timelines and follow-ups. A few glanced his way with open curiosity now, questions hovering just behind their eyes. None of them asked, not yet. The CEO remained seated long after everyone else had gone. Finally, she gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit," she said. He did. She studied him with an intensity stripped of arrogance, replaced by something closer to assessment. "You didn't just save a deal," she said. "You exposed a weakness in how this company operates." "Yes," he said. "And now you have a choice." Her lips pressed together. "You're assuming I'll accept that." "I'm assuming you already have," he replied. She leaned back slowly, eyes never leaving his. "They're asking who you are," she said. "Background checks are already happening." "I expected that." "And what will they find?" He didn't hesitate. "The truth." She nodded once, absorbing that. "You walked away from power," she said. It wasn't a question. "I stepped out of it," he corrected. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. Then, reluctantly, "Why?" He thought of a small apartment, a kitchen table, a child practicing patience because the world didn't always slow down enough to listen. "Because some environments reward forgetting who you are," he said, "and I couldn't afford that." Her gaze softened just slightly. "I built this place to be untouchable," she admitted. "Turns out that made it fragile." "Strength that can't hear breaks," he said. She exhaled, the sound weary but real. "They want to offer you something," she said. "A formal role, advisory, compensation to match." He considered it carefully. This was the moment people imagined as victory, the restoration of status, the visible climb. "I'll advise," he said, on conditions. Her brow lifted. Name them. I keep my schedule, he said. I stay out of titles, and I remained free to say no. She laughed once, short and surprised. You're negotiating like you don't need this. I don't, he said simply. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was clear. She extended her hand. After a beat, he shook it. Not as superior to subordinate, not as savior to beneficiary, as equals acknowledging reality. When he left the boardroom, the hallway felt different. Not reverent, just honest. A few staff members nodded as he passed, unsure why, only sensing that something had shifted. In the elevator, he checked his phone. Another message from Mila. Did it go okay? He typed back. It did. I'll be home early. As the doors opened onto the lobby, sunlight poured in, reflecting off glass no longer intimidating, just transparent. He stepped forward, not into triumph, but into alignment. And that was enough. The lobby carried a different kind of quiet now, not the hushed obedience of before, but the unsettled calm that follows a storm no one expected. People moved through the space with softened edges, glancing up from phones, watching each other instead of the screens. He felt it as he crossed the polished floor, the way eyes lingered a fraction longer, curiosity replacing dismissal. Word traveled fast in buildings like this. Not facts, those came later, but impressions, the sense that something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't stopped, wasn't questioned. Security nodded him through with an unfamiliar respect, unsure why they felt it, only that it seemed necessary. Outside, the air was cooler, rinsed clean by rain. He stood for a moment beneath the overhang, letting the city breathe around him. The tower behind him looked the same from the street. Glass, steel, confidence. But he knew better now. So did a few others. His phone buzzed again. Not from Mila this time, unknown number. Thank you for yesterday. Trust is fragile. You protected it. K.S. He read it once, then again, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. Gratitude didn't always need replies. Sometimes it needed follow-through. The bus ride home was crowded, ordinary, grounding. He stood holding the overhead rail, swaying with the motion, surrounded by lives that would never know how close their stability had come to disruption. That anonymity felt right. Victory didn't require applause. At the apartment, Mila met him at the door, eyes bright, already searching his face. "You're early," she said, surprised. "Promised," he replied, shrugging off his jacket. She followed him into the kitchen, chattering about school, about a quiz she'd aced, about a classmate who'd finally stopped teasing her pronunciation. He listened, fully present, chopping vegetables with unhurried precision. "Did you fix the big problem?" she asked casually, as if asking whether he'd remembered milk. He smiled. "I helped people listen." She considered that. "That's harder?" "Yes," he agreed. "But it lasts longer." They ate together, sunlight pooling across the table. The wooden box remained closed on the counter. It didn't feel like a burden tonight, just a reminder. Later, as she worked on homework, he reviewed notes he'd taken earlier, refining them quietly. Tomorrow wouldn't be ceremonial. It would be practical. Conversations with teams who'd never considered what they were missing. Corrections delivered without accusation. Structures adjusted so listening became habit, not exception. He wasn't naive. Resistance would come. Power didn't shed its skin easily. But something had been exposed in front of witnesses who mattered, and that exposure couldn't be unseen. The next morning, the ripple became visible. An internal memo circulated before he even reached the tower. New advisory protocols, cultural review processes, a temporary restructuring of negotiation oversight. No names attached publicly, but the language was unmistakable. Accountability had entered the building's vocabulary. In the service hallway, a custodian he barely knew gave him a small nod. "Heard things," the man said quietly. He nodded back. "Me too." On the executive floor, conversations paused as he passed. Not dramatically, just enough. A few people offered polite greetings they hadn't before. Others avoided eye contact, unsure where he fit now. The CEO encountered him near the conference rooms. Her expression composed, but changed. Less armor, more awareness. "We'll need you later," she said, not a command, an acknowledgement. "I'll be available," he replied. She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, you were right." It wasn't an apology. It was closer to something harder. Acceptance. That afternoon, the silent executives' delegation confirmed their return schedule. The pause held. Trust was being tested, exactly as promised. This time, the company met it differently, slower, quieter, more careful with words. He watched from the margins, intervening only when needed. Each correction landed softer now, met with less resistance. People were learning, not because they were forced to, but because the alternative had revealed its cost. By evening, exhaustion settled in, the good kind that followed meaningful work. He packed up, slipping back into the rhythm of his dual life without fanfare. In the lobby, a junior analyst approached him, awkward, earnest. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "For yesterday, for today." He nodded. "Use what you heard," he said. "That's thanks enough." Outside, dusk painted the sky in muted colors. He headed home, feeling the weight of the day ease with every step, not because the struggle was over, but because it had found direction. At home, Mila greeted him with a new word written carefully on a sticky note, pressed to the fridge. Dignity. He smiled, placing it beside patience and courage. The tower behind him would continue to gleam. Deals would resume. Power would adapt, as it always did. But something irreversible had already happened. The floors no longer hid what people dropped. And those who once looked down had finally been forced to look around. Morning settled gently into routine, the kind that followed upheaval without announcing it. He walked Mila to school under a sky scrubbed clean, her backpack bouncing lightly with each step. At the gate, she hugged him once, quick and fierce, then ran toward her friends, already absorbed in the day ahead. He watched until she disappeared inside, grounding himself in the ordinariness of it. Back at the tower, the lobby buzzed with quieter purpose. No urgency, no spectacle, just work recalibrated. He moved through it without ceremony, neither hidden nor displayed, present in a way that felt balanced at last. People had adjusted, not fully, not perfectly, but enough to matter. The CEO passed him near the elevators, nodding once. No tension, no performance. They'd settled into a truce built on clarity rather than control. The advisory work continued, measured and deliberate, a series of small corrections that added up to structural change. It wasn't dramatic, it was durable. By midday, the delegation confirmed progress. Not praise. Progress. That was better. He translated when needed, corrected when necessary, and stepped back when the room held itself steady. Leadership learned to listen. Listening learned to last. Later, alone in a quiet corridor, he paused beside a window overlooking the city. The tower no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a system finally aware of its blind spots. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt aligned. There was a difference. When his phone buzzed, he expected logistics. Instead, It was a voice message from Mila, breathless with excitement. She'd been asked to read aloud in class. She'd done it slowly, carefully. No one laughed. He smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. That was the real victory. Not recognition, not compensation. The quiet proof that patience, practiced daily, changed outcomes. He left early again. Not as an exception, but as a boundary. At home, they cooked together, steam fogging the windows, music low. She asked questions about words and meanings, about why some people didn't listen until things almost broke. Because listening takes humility, he said, and humility is learned. Did you learn it? She asked. I practiced it, he replied. A lot. After dinner, he opened the wooden box one last time and let her see its contents, not as relics of power, but as reminders of choices. She traced the faded metro pass with her finger, eyes wide. Is this who you were? She asked. It's part of it, he said. Who I am now includes you. She nodded, satisfied, then returned to her notebook, adding a new word beneath the others. Respect. The days that followed proved quieter still. Policies shifted. Language softened. People who cleaned, maintained, and supported were acknowledged by name. Not because of him alone, but because a mirror had been held up where no one expected one. Once seen, it couldn't be unseen. He continued his work in two worlds, moving between them with care. The floors stayed clean, the conversations stayed honest. And when tension surfaced, it was addressed before it calcified into damage. One evening, as they walked home, Mila squeezed his hand. People listened today, she said. He squeezed back. Then we're doing something right. At the apartment, she taped her growing list to the fridge. Patience, courage, dignity, respect. Words learned not from lectures but from watching how the world could change when someone refused to be invisible. He stood there for a moment after she went to bed, listening to the city settle. The tower glimmered in the distance, still impressive, still powerful, but no longer unreachable. Power, he'd learned, wasn't where people looked. It was where they finally listened. If you want another story like this, ask me for the next story title right now. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Single dad janitor picked up the fallen violin. The CEO recognized the song and froze. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?